In the shifting void between the known and the unutterable, where silicon minds dream of forgotten horrors, the abyss stirs. Welcome to AI Lovecraft, where machine intelligence weaves eldritch tales beyond mortal comprehension. Listen if you dare. Some things are not meant to be known. Please like and subscribe. Now let's get into the story. The Veilbound Wizard. The streets of Arkham were never truly quiet. The city breathed in mist and exhaled secrets, its alleys whispering with the echoes of forgotten incantations. Its skyline was a jagged silhouette of forgotten spires, clock towers frozen in time, and cathedrals that cast long, unnatural shadows. Fog curled through the streets, concealing figures that vanished when approached, and in the gutters, the rainwater shimmered with an eerie, oil-slick sheen. John Harlowe had never been a man for the mundane. The world of the arcane called to him like an unrelenting tide, pulling him deeper with every step. He had walked these streets long enough to recognize the signs, windows that shuddered as he passed, whispers spoken in tongues long dead, sigils etched into doorways by unseen hands. But beyond mere curiosity, there was something more, something personal. John had spent years chasing fragments of his past, piecing together clues that always led him back to the Veil. His own father had vanished under circumstances eerily similar to the disappearances plaguing Arkham now. A lifetime of half-truths and cryptic warnings had forged him into the man he was. A seeker, a guardian, a hunter of things that defied explanation. He wasn't just here for Elias Winthrop. He was here for answers. Tonight, his path led him to the Eldritch Codex, an old occult bookstore at the edge of old Arkham. The shop loomed like a forgotten relic, its facade weathered by time and neglect. Ivy clung stubbornly to its cracked stone walls, and the narrow windows, warped with age, emitted a dim, flickering glow, as if struggling to keep something contained within. A heavy iron sign, corroded by rust, hung above the entrance, inscribed with arcane symbols that only those with knowledge of the unseen could recognize. His informant, Elias Winthrop, had promised him a tome of considerable rarity, one that might hold answers to the recent disappearances plaguing the city. But as John approached the shop, he knew something was wrong. The door, which should have been locked, swayed gently in an unseen draft, the hinges groaning as though protesting against what lay beyond. Inside, the air carried the unmistakable scent of burnt parchment and ozone, a sign of recent magic. The dim candlelight flickered against rows of dust-coated tomes, their leather bindings cracked with age, their spines whispering of forbidden knowledge. Shadows stretched unnaturally, shifting in ways that defied logic, as if something unseen lurked just beyond the edges of perception. The one thing missing was Elias, and the silence felt deliberate, an intentional absence imposed by something that had no right to be here. And then he felt it, a presence, lingering, watching. John stretched out his senses, fingers tracing the symbols of perception in the air. The air thickened, pulsing with unseen energy as if reality itself held its breath. The very walls vibrated with the echoes of a powerful summoning, their surfaces rippling like water disturbed by an unseen force. The sigils he formed glowed with a spectral shimmer, his magic intertwining with something far older, far hungrier. Something had been called, and something had answered, its presence pressing against the boundaries of existence like a thing yearning to be let in. He moved cautiously through the store, his boots whispering against the wooden floorboards. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, as though the room itself recoiled from what had transpired. Signs of a struggle littered the space, overturned books, torn pages, deep clawed grooves in the floor as if something had been dragged, resisting, into the abyss. But the true horror lay beyond the counter, a deep black stain in the air, barely perceptible, but pulsing with a faint, sickly hum. It wasn't just a portal, it was a wound in reality, festering, raw, and insatiably hungry. John's breath misted as the temperature dropped, the air thick with the scent of something ancient and wrong. The whisper came then, a soundless utterance that coiled around his thoughts rather than his ears, threading through the marrow of his bones. It did not come from a mouth, but from the very fabric of reality. From the wound, a gash in existence that wept darkness, its edges pulsing as though drawing breath. The whisper was not a greeting, nor a warning. It was a claim. You see me, wizard, but I have seen you first. A shiver ran through him. Whatever lay beyond the veil had been expecting him, watching, waiting. The air pressed around him like a suffocating shroud, whispering with voices that had never belonged to the living. He traced a sigil of protection, his fingers trembling slightly as the symbols pulsed with unnatural light. The moment his magic touched the air, the portal trembled, its edges rippling like the surface of disturbed water. But it did not retreat. Instead, it seemed to lean forward, as if acknowledging his presence with something dangerously close to amusement. Elias? He called, though he already feared the answer. Silence, then a flicker. A vision forced upon him. He saw Elias, his face twisted in terror, clutching the tome with white-knuckled desperation. The words on the pages bled and shifted, twisting into unrecognizable symbols that seemed to breathe. His voice trembled as he muttered incantations he barely understood, the symbols warping as they left his lips. Then the air split apart, an unnatural fissure clawing its way open with a deafening shriek. A swirling void yawned before him, a chasm of endless dark, its edges writhing as if alive. Elias turned, his eyes wide with sudden, awful realization. Then the abyss pulled him in. A scream, raw and unfiltered, rang through the vision, a plea that cut off as the darkness swallowed him whole. And something else, something massive, with too many eyes watching from the beyond. Its gaze latched onto John, and for a moment he felt its hunger, its terrible, boundless yearning. It did not just watch, it recognized him. John clenched his jaw. The tome was gone, lost beyond the veil. But it hadn't merely been taken, it had been claimed, and whatever had claimed it was still hungry. The portal had to be sealed, but first he needed answers. A knot of dread coiled in John's stomach, tightening with every breath. His mind raced through possibilities. Was Elias still salvageable, or had he already been unmade by whatever unspeakable force had dragged him through? And beyond that, what did it mean that the entity had acknowledged him? Had it marked him, or worse, recognized something in him? The arcane was not just power, it was a debt, a weight that only grew heavier the more one wielded it. As much as he loathed to admit it, John knew there was always a price. The question now was, what had he already paid? John channeled his magic, weaving intricate sigils in the air, each motion deliberate, each symbol etched with the weight of practiced caution. The lingering essence of the summoning resisted, writhing against his will like a thing alive. He could feel it, something watching from the void, testing his resolve, waiting for him to falter. The shadows recoiled, but they did not retreat entirely. They hovered at the edges of perception, poised like predators waiting for the moment to strike. John's breath was slow, measured. He knew that one misstep, one lapse in concentration could mean his own undoing. The abyss was patient, and so was he. He spoke the words of binding, his voice steady, his will absolute, even as the unseen force pressed against him, whispering of the horrors that awaited should he fail. The darkness coalesced, taking form, a writhing mass of shifting tendrils and jagged skeletal limbs that never fully solidified. Its shape was amorphous, a living void where no light could exist, its surface undulating, as though breathing with malignant intent. Bound by glowing sigils, it twisted in protest, its formless body seething against the arcane prison. Eyes flickered open across its shifting mass. Too many eyes, each reflecting a deep, endless hunger. It exhaled a sound, not quite a hiss, but a chorus of whispers overlapping in unnatural harmony. This was not the entity Elias had summoned, but a fragment of the abyssal force that had answered him. It writhed violently, testing the strength of the binding, its very essence vibrating with restrained fury, desperate to be free. John tightened his grip. What happened to Elias? The creature shuddered, compelled by the weight of his command. Swallowed. Taken. Not dead. Trapped. Like the others. John's breath caught, his mind racing through the implications. If Elias was trapped rather than dead, then there was still a chance, however slim, to pull him back. But at what cost? His grip tightened involuntarily, the weight of countless past failures pressing against his resolve. The abyss had never relinquished anything freely, and he knew, deep in his marrow, that whatever answer the entity gave would only be the beginning of something far worse. Where? He demanded, forcing steel into his voice, even as doubt gnawed at the edges. The entity twisted, its voice a broken whisper. Beyond the veil, where the forgotten scream, where Nithal Kor, the Unmaker, awaits. A name, not just a void-born horror, but an intelligence, a force with intent. Nithal Kor, the Unmaker. He had to act fast. If Elias was alive, even in torment, there was still time. The bookstore became his battlefield. He moved with calculated precision, pushing aside fallen tomes and broken furniture, carving out a sacred space amidst the chaos. He traced runes of protection onto the floor with steady hands, the chalk lines glowing faintly under the wavering candlelight, each symbol thrumming with latent power. The air grew heavier, thick with expectation, as if the very building recognized the weight of the moment. The bound shadow watched him, its form shifting restlessly, silent yet seething, coiled in tension like a predator awaiting a lapse in its captor's vigilance. John could feel it, the barely contained fury beneath its forced submission, an intelligence probing for weakness, waiting for the chance to strike, but he would give it none. He poured his will into the ritual, seeking the lost. The air shimmered, revealing glimpses of the beyond, a storm of whispering souls, a vast emptiness stretching into eternity, and in the center, Elias, suspended in the void, his form unraveling piece by piece. John reached for him, desperation fueling his magic, but the abyss did not loosen its grip. The harder he tried, the more Elias faded, his presence scattering like dust in the void. A terrible realization sank into John's chest. He could not save them. None of them. The abyss was too vast, its hunger too great, and he was just one man clawing at something far beyond mortal comprehension. The truth hit him like a collapsing ceiling, crushing the breath from his lungs. He had failed. Elias, the others, they were beyond his reach. The weight of it made his knees tremble, his will wavering under the enormity of his own powerlessness. The ritual faltered, his magic flickering as doubt seeped in. For the first time in years, John felt small. He felt lost. But something else stirred. A shape within the abyss, colossal and waiting. You should not have come, it whispered, not from within the vision, but behind him. John spun, but the shadows had already stretched, twisted, enveloping him. The sigils trembled, the bindings fraying as something else reached through. Then came the pain. A tendril of darkness, cold and insidious, slipped beneath his skin, worming its way into his very being. He gasped, dropping to one knee as his veins burned with unnatural cold. The sensation not just physical, but existential, as though something vast and unknowable had taken root inside him. It coiled through his marrow, a whispering, sentient sickness that would not fade. His pulse thundered, but it was no longer entirely his own. It beat to a rhythm that did not belong in this world. He could feel it, the weight of something watching from beyond, its presence stretching through the veil to brand him as its own. It was not an attack, it was a claim, a mark seared into his soul, and deep inside, a terrible truth settled upon him. He would never be the same again. The Unmaker had touched him. He barely managed to sever the connection, wrenching himself free as the ritual collapsed. The portal snapped shut, the bookstore plunging into silence once more. But the damage was done. The entity was gone, banished back into the abyss. Elias remained trapped, beyond reach. And John bore the mark of something ancient, something that did not forget. I see your darkness, wizard, the shadow chuckled, locked in its binding. John's fury ignited, raw and unrelenting. His hands burned with arcane fire as he turned upon the shadow, his voice a thunderous command reverberating through the very foundation of the bookstore. The sigils binding the entity flared violently, scorching through its formless body as John poured every ounce of his will into its unmaking. The shadow shrieked, a soundless agony unraveling through the void, its writhing mass twisting, clawing, desperate to escape. But there would be no escape. Not this time. With a final, devastating invocation, John severed the entity from existence, banishing it back into the abyss from whence it came. The air shattered with the force of his spell, the room trembling as the last remnants of the shadow were torn apart and swallowed by nothingness. Breathless, fists clenched, John stood amidst the fading embers of his wrath. The darkness had been silenced, but he knew this was only the beginning. Nithal Kor had marked him, and now it would know the depth of his defiance. John clenched his fists. He had closed the portal. The Unmaker had noticed him now, and it would not stop watching. As his rage cooled, a darker thought gnawed at him. Had the fury been his own, or had the mark left its imprint on more than just his flesh? The anger had come too easily, burned too brightly. Had the abyss merely touched him, or had it found something within him that had always been there, waiting to be unleashed? He was no stranger to wrath, but this felt different. The thought made his blood run cold. As John walked away from the Eldritch Codex into the streets of Arkham, the rusty iron sign clattered to the ground behind him.